An assassination plot stopped just in time. Israeli security says a network linked to Iran was building explosives to target former PM Naftali Bennett. But here's the question: why him? A fierce critic of Netanyahu, not part of the current government. So, who really stood to gain? Because in this case, the target may be clear, but the motive is anything but. Israeli security forces say they have foiled an Iranian-directed plot to assassinate former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, a man who has spent recent weeks publicly declaring his intent to unseat Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. At the center of it is Ami Gaidarov, a 22-year-old Haifa resident who, according to a joint police and Shin Bet statement released on April 9th, had been in contact with an Iranian intelligence handler since August 2025. Gaidarov was detained in March by the Shin Bet and the Lahav 433 Major Crimes Unit. Investigators say he rented an apartment in Haifa, turned it into a makeshift explosives laboratory, and sent photographs and videos of the process to his handlers as proof of work. Gaidarov was paid over 70,000 Israeli shekels, roughly $23,000, mostly in cryptocurrency. Two others, identified as Sergei Libman and Eduard Shovtiuk, were detained on suspicion of helping procure raw materials and test the explosives. According to I-24 News, at least one test was carried out inside an underground public shelter in Haifa.
Gaidarov agreed to manufacture explosive material, which was intended to harm a senior figure.
Gaidarov never named Bennett during interrogation. Police say the locations he surveilled pointed to the former premier as the intended target. He was also tasked with photographing Haifa port and missile impact sites during the war with Iran, and identifying a building overlooking the port for possible installation of surveillance equipment. Indictments are expected in the coming days. The plot sits against a charged political backdrop. Through March and into April, Bennett had been the loudest opposition voice against Netanyahu, telling Israeli media on March 27th that the government was putting Haredi politics above battlefield readiness, and that there was a political echelon actively preventing the IDF from winning.
Netanyahu, in his actions, is tearing the state of Israel apart. There's also a political echelon that keeps the IDF from winning. I am the only person who has replaced Netanyahu as Prime Minister in the last generation. I know how to do it, I've done it, and I'll do it again.
Then, on April 8th, the day the US-Iran ceasefire was announced, Bennett went further, warning the truce would leave Israel facing a vengeful Iran more determined than ever to go nuclear. The biggest loose end here seems to be the motive behind the assassination attempt. It makes sense for Iran to target a current minister or someone who is part of the current setup. Targeting a former prime minister who has been publicly against Netanyahu does not make sense. What is also interesting to ponder is who benefits from Bennett's death. Now, whether it was Tehran's bounty or someone on the inside cannot be confirmed for now. What is confirmed is that the network was operational, the explosives were manufactured, and the arrest came just in time. For over a month, Israel has been deep into one of the longest and most demanding wars in its history. And the pressure is no longer confined to the battlefield. It is visible in the economy, in public services, and increasingly in the lives of ordinary citizens. At the center of this moment is a record-breaking national budget, presented by Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich as a necessary wartime measure. He described it as a responsible budget, shaped by necessity, driven by the costs of war. On paper, the numbers reflect a nation under strain. The government has outlined a spending framework of 699 billion shekels, but actual authorized expenditure is estimated to be closer to 850 billion. Defense spending alone has surged beyond 142 billion shekels, as the war, which came to a pause on April 7th thanks to a ceasefire, drained roughly 3.7 billion shekels every week. These are figures that suggest urgency, discipline, and a government focused on survival. But critics argue that what is being presented as a necessity is, in reality, something very different. They say this is not a disciplined wartime budget, but a politically driven plan designed to keep Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his coalition in power. That accusation captures the growing anger among analysts, opposition figures, and parts of the public. The core argument is that instead of focusing resources where they are most urgently needed, the government has chosen to protect politically sensitive spending while shifting the burden onto citizens already under pressure. Cuts to essential services are exposing the strain of a prolonged war. A 3% reduction across health, education, and welfare is hitting sectors already under pressure. Tens of thousands of war-wounded need care, while schools face repeated disruption and families struggle with rising stress. Economic pressure is worsening, with reserve duty affecting businesses and a deepening cost of living crisis. Nearly 28% of children now live below the poverty line. Critics argue the focus should be recovery, yet attention has shifted to 6 billion shekels in coalition funding, widely seen as politically driven rather than addressing urgent national needs. A significant portion of this funding is directed towards the Haredi, or ultra-Orthodox sector. An additional 2.2 billion shekels has been allocated, along with further increases in support for an education system that largely operates outside the national curriculum. Total funding for this system now exceeds 5.1 billion shekels. Critics argue that this raises serious concerns about long-term economic sustainability, particularly as fewer than 4% of students in these institutions complete full matriculation exams in core subjects such as maths, English, and science. The concern is that this model does not prepare young people for participation in a modern workforce, potentially increasing dependency on state support in the future. The concern is that the allocation may conflict with existing Supreme Court rulings, suggesting not only fiscal irresponsibility, but also a disregard for legal constraints. At the same time, the pressure on Israel's military continues to grow. The Chief of Staff has warned of a shortage of around 15,000 combat soldiers, even as operations continue across multiple fronts. Reservists are serving extended tours at a high personal and financial cost, while communities, particularly in the north, remain under constant threat. Defense systems continue to intercept incoming attacks, but the strain on manpower and resources is evident. Yet, critics argue that the budget does not reflect the scale of this challenge. Instead of focusing resources on strengthening defense capacity and supporting those directly affected by the war, the government has continued to expand its own structure. Several new ministries have been created, including roles focused on strategic affairs, regional cooperation, and national missions. These positions, critics say, serve political purposes rather than operational needs. Rather than reducing expenditure, some of these ministries have seen increased funding, reinforcing perceptions that political priorities are taking precedence over national ones. The consequences of these decisions are becoming increasingly visible in everyday life. A report highlighted on Israeli television painted a stark picture of systems under strain. According to a Channel 13 anchor, the education system is effectively paralyzed, with teachers unwilling to return to classrooms. Healthcare services are being scaled back, with no clear budgetary direction to support alternative solutions such as remote care. Transport networks are under pressure, with significant disruptions to air travel and public infrastructure. Even energy systems have shown signs of instability.
This evening, the Prime Minister boasted that he had ordered planning for this war more than 6 months ago. Here is how the country's critical systems are functioning. The education system does not exist. Teachers, of course, have no intention of returning to classes. The healthcare system is cutting back on treatments, and there has not even been a budget directive to allow doctors to be incentivized to provide remote care. One railway line is shut down, another has only just resumed operations. Around 80% of air travel from Israel is suspended. The light rail systems in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem are not operating, and the regular train network is only partially functioning. The cultural sector is effectively dead. The sports sector is also shut down. The compensation plan for businesses has not yet passed its first legislative stage, and funds are expected, at best, in May. Several key government ministries are still without appointed ministers, and funding for protecting the northern region has not been approved.
Taken together, these signals point to a broader concern. This is no longer just a debate about fiscal policy. It is about the resilience and functionality of the state itself under prolonged pressure. At the heart of the criticism is a single consistent argument that this budget is not designed to manage a country through war, but to manage a political coalition through crisis. This perception has fueled growing frustration, as many Israelis feel they are being asked to carry an increasing burden while decisions are shaped by political survival rather than national interest. Israel now finds itself at a critical juncture. The war continues, the economic strain is deepening, and public systems are under pressure. This budget was presented as a response to the crisis, but for many, it has come to symbolize it. And that leaves a difficult and unavoidable question. Is this a government guiding the country through one of its most challenging periods, or one prioritizing its own survival while the nation absorbs the cost?